Another day, another Chinese budget banger. Today we're gonna have a look at a very interesting budget mouse straight out of China. Whilst I wouldn't really call it budget, I call it more affordable because this thing comes in at around $60 US. It comes with a hot swap system, 4K in a stock condition with the dongle included, but there are definitely some things that you need to know before getting this thing. But before we move on, as a quick disclaimer, this thing was indeed sent out to me by Zaopin via MetKeys. However, that does not affect my opinion on this product whatsoever, but thank you Zaopin for sending it out. And I also wanted to mention that if you're at all interested in enthusiast peripheral reviews, definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button and a notification bell right next to it to be notified for all my upcoming reviews. Getting into the boring stuff, we'll start with the unboxing experience. Inside of the box, you get a velvet pouch, some decent grips that look like the BTL V2 grips, a screwdriver that will make much more sense in a minute, some spare skates, and also this optional secondary skate for the bottom here, which makes these screws readily accessible. Of course, you also get the mouse itself and then also this fancy ass 4K dongle. There's also a black USB-A to USB-C cable included, which is this one, but no, there are no optional micro switches included even though this mouse is hot swap. In terms of weight, this thing sits at around 65 grams. Now, this is definitely not the lightest thing on the market, but that is because the battery is pretty big and also due to various other reasons that you'll see in a bit. One of those reasons being definitely the QC, because this thing is more solid than the wall right next to me. Stubby could squeeze the ever-living shit out of this mouse and it would still not budge. This thing is probably the most solid mouse I have in my arsenal right now. The only thing that's a tiny bit flexy is the bottom shell, but honestly, who cares about that? Other than that, this thing really is as solid as a rock. Now, thanks to this optional secondary bottom skate, I can now open up the mouse without having to ruin the skate actually. You're able to open your mouse right away and actually change these switches here because these are inside of some hot swap sockets. But before we do that, I want to mention that this is a 500 milliamp hour battery, and this is a very huge reason to why this mouse is so heavy. If you want to do some crazy weight reduction, definitely start with the battery and solder in a 150 milliamp hour or a 250 milliamp hour, depending on if you want to use 4K or 1K. I've personally been using 1K all the way along, and I'm still at around 54% battery charge without even having charged this mouse whatsoever, and I've been using this for over a week straight. So the battery definitely lasts freaking ages with the 500 milliamp hour version, so I will be going down to something the likes of 150. That will definitely shed off around 6 to 8 grams depending on what battery that you get. When you open the mouse up, definitely be careful about this ribbon cable, but this one you can simply plug straight out. That is only if you're not really too comfortable with modding mice like this, because ribbon cables are always the first things that break. After that, you can simply swap out the switches here in the front if you'd like to. These stock switches here are TTC Golds. They're not the most heavy or the most tactile switch out there because this one is the 60M version. I personally wasn't the biggest fan of them, but I definitely also didn't have any issues, but we'll get into the buttons a bit more later. If you want to swap out the switch, you just need to slightly loosen these 3 screws and then you can simply pull the switch out. And just for the sake of the video, I'm gonna put in some blue shell pink dots. Just make sure to not completely exaggerate the force that you put into screwing these things in, because they really only need to make contact with the pin and not being able to move too much whilst clicking your mouse. I personally really like this mechanism because that way you are definitely sure that the switch is 100% flat with a PCB. I'm definitely gonna be modding this in the future though if I want to pick it up again, because this thing is quite heavy with this huge ass fucking battery. Now, in terms of shape, there's actually not too many mice out there to compare this thing to. Most people call this thing an asymmetrical GPX. Some people call it an ergonomic GPX, but that doesn't make any sense because this thing is not a real ergo mouse. It's much more just of an asymmetrical because it doesn't have that much of a tilt grip that is being enforced. I guess you could call this a hybrid type of shape since it's half asymmetrical, half ergo, and it really does give you SteelSeries Prime vibes. But the thing is, as soon as you look at Elo shapes, it is not even similar. I could have printed out a 3D model to do a direct comparison, but I really don't think that it is that similar if the outlines are actually that different. But because so many people of you have definitely held a GPX in your hand before, I want to do a side-by-side comparison of the outlines from beneath here, and as you can see, the overall size is super similar. In hand, the C2 does feel a tiny bit wider, and that definitely does align with what you see underneath as well. From the top, they definitely do look very similar, but of course with the C2 having that kind of slant off to the side and having that asymmetrical shape. And I would definitely say that if you can find a decent grip on the GPX, you can definitely find your grip here in the C2. My hands are 19 by 10. I play an aggressive claw grip, and the way that I hold my GPX here is definitely just a pure aggressive claw grip where the only contact that I make with my palm is down here. But when I actually do use my Z2 in game, I notice that I go into a pincer claw grip. And what that is that I have contact on my hand up here. So my grip is definitely supported by the bottom part of my palm down here and also by the meat over here. This grip is super freaking stable, and I can definitely notice that asymmetrical shape over here getting into my hand, since this part is simply not existent on something like the GPX, which is a symmetrical mouse. Also, if you're interested in this weight saving base and also modding on a GPX2, I will be doing a ultimate GPX modding guide and also providing the files and also physical copies to my bases very soon. So definitely stay tuned if you're at all interested in that. Other than that, there's basically no comparison that I can do with this mouse since it's that unique. In terms of the coating, it is very rubbery and I definitely do like it. I don't think that it gets oily or disgusting or anything like that. As you can see, I haven't even cleaned it and it still looks pretty clean. And I personally can't really see anybody having an issue with this because as soon as your hand gets a bit warm, it's super grippy and yada yada yada. But in terms of the buttons, as I've already said, the 60M TTC goals that I used aren't really my favorite type of switch. But in terms of the click tolerances, I'm definitely enjoying this thing. Especially the issue that I have on Minimize is that my fingers are pretty high up on the buttons here towards the front. So if there's too much post travel, I can barely use the mouse. And I'm happy to say that the post travel here on the front end of these clicks is definitely not too bad. And I didn't notice this being an issue in game whatsoever. There's basically no pre-travel on this thing. And in terms of the side buttons, they're actually pretty darn spammable. They're pretty light, but my backside button definitely does have some pre-travel. It's about the same as on the GPX2, which also had a lot of improvements on these side buttons. And in terms of the scroll, this one is actually pretty tactile, pretty defined, but not cheap feeling whatsoever, and also not too loud. Here you can still spam, but also have these defined steps when using your inventory. And when pressing in mouse 3, it is definitely a spammable one, and I really like it. In terms of skates, these are the stock skates that it comes with. They are pretty thin, so if you're using an extra soft mouse pad, you will definitely be touching the plastic of the mouse on that pad. However, in terms of glide, they weren't too bad. They are a tiny bit more controlled than most of my 100% PDFE skates. But yeah, for $59, I really can't complain here. In terms of the battery life, this thing lasts forever. I've been using my mouse for about 1.5 weeks total with daily usage all day long. I did use it on 1K, but my battery life, even though I never charged this thing, I only unboxed it and started using it. It is still at around 54%. That is definitely impressive, despite it still being a 500 milliamp hour battery. So what I will be doing if I pick this thing up again, I will definitely be putting a 150 milliamp hour battery inside of this thing to get it straight below 60 grams. If you do use 4K, I would actually say that this thing might just last you a whole week. Now, in terms of 4K, I did already mention you get this dongle included inside of the box. That is really nice to see. Huge props to Zaopin here. In terms of the 4K performance, I personally didn't see any issues myself, but then again, I don't do any scientific testing since I neither have the instruments to do so, nor do I have the passion to go full schizo on specs like that. I did actually have some occasional sensor skips on my desktop with this mouse. I don't know if it's because of the sleep mode maybe kicking in too early, but I did contact Zaopin about that, and here's their response. I think the response would be pretty good if it would be a normal consumer, but man, I hope they at least forward it to their development team. Now, when it comes to the actual software, I will definitely make sure to put a link down in the description below because this one is pretty difficult to find. Here you can change your debounce time, your DPI, and yes, I'm currently on 3200 DPI just to try and see if I have been throwing all my life. Your polling rate, and here I would definitely go for peak performance, set it to high power mode over here, and then you can choose if you want motion sync or not. Inside of here, you'll also be able to upgrade the firmware directly in the future, and if you don't have the 4K dongle yet because you bought the 1K version, even though it's $5 cheaper for whatever reason, here compare that 4K dongle. And yes, there is actually a 1K version that is like $5 cheaper, but I will not even mention it because it's that irrelevant. Now, when it comes to my personal opinion about this thing, I would definitely say that you're not doing anything wrong by getting this at $60. Maybe it is actually cheaper with shipping included if you get it directly from AliExpress, so check that out yourself if you would like to. But as the safest option, I will just be listing that Meg Keys listing down below. This mouse is actually available in two different white versions, one with a black bottom and one with a gray bottom. This black version, obviously. There's also a red version and then the orange version as well. It is difficult for me to recommend this to somebody in terms of shape because it is definitely very unique, but if you do want a GPX style of shape that is kind of more made for right-hand people, I can definitely recommend it because I do find it very comfortable. However, my personal preference is definitely towards smaller mice, so I probably won't be picking this thing up too much again. As I already said, this thing is solid as a brick, so if that is what you care most about, definitely go for this thing. But then again, the stock condition is around 65 grams, so keep that in mind if that is something you don't enjoy. I personally would say that it didn't affect me in game whatsoever, but as soon as I went over to something that I modded down to 46 grams at around the same size, which keep in mind is almost 20 grams lighter, I definitely noticed a difference, especially in very fast-paced games like Fortnite. But keep in mind, this thing costs basically twice as much, and the 4K saturation probably won't be any better. Now, to the conclusion, who is this mouse for? If you've ever held a GPX in your hand and thought to yourself, man, I wish this were just made for right-hand people, this is definitely the right thing for you. If you can't spend more than $60 on a mouse and you want something that is rock fucking solid, get this thing. If you want to be able to play around with these switch choices, get this freaking thing because it's got fucking hot swap. And there's even a secondary skate included so that you can open it at all times. But definitely don't get this thing if you're left-handed, and don't get this thing if you really care about really lightweight mice. In a stock condition, I do find that this mouse is super solid. I also want to mention that it does have a Bluetooth functionality for those people who care, and that is already about it. These Chinese mice are definitely slowly taking over the market, together with other really cheap alternatives like the VXE R1 Pro, which I also have a video up on already. And I really don't see a single reason to spend 120 to 160 US dollars, depending on what this thing actually goes for in your country, when you can get a mouse at a fraction of the price that is just as good, if not better, in certain aspects. Other than that, that's about it for this video. Huge thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace out.